At 1:02 a.m., my front door rattled like a loose tooth in a winter jaw. I flipped the deadbolt and my daughter fell into my arms, lips split, breath hitching, whispering, "Mom." The porch light baked her skin the color of old paper. The chill off the lake ran straight through both of us. I steadied her with one hand and tapped 911 with the other, counting each inhale the way I've counted them on traffic stops at 3 a.m. I'm Maeve Carver. I've worn a badge in Willowbend for nearly 3 decades, long enough to know what a fist looks like after the fact, and long enough to know when to be a mother before I am anything else. I pressed a clean dish towel to Iris's mouth and listened for the operator. My voice came out level, the way muscle memory makes it. Adult female, conscious, bleeding controlled, send EMS. Inside. My kitchen smelled like coffee gone cold. I cleared a chair with my hip, set Iris down, and kept my palm between her shoulder blades until the tremors faded to shivers. "Did he hit you?" I asked. She nodded once, shame and fury fighting for the same inch of space in her eyes. Her phone buzzed on the table, a name lighting the screen I did not say out loud. I turned it face down and reached for the insurance card she never remembers to carry. Sirens grew from a thread to a rope. I unlocked the side gate for the medics, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked twice, then quit, as if it understood. I told Iris we were safe. I said it like a promise and like a threat. By sunrise, I would learn the bruises weren't the worst damage. The morning after that night felt unreal, as if the air itself had thickened into glass. I brewed coffee I couldn't taste and sat by Iris's bed while she slept with gauze taped to her cheek. Every time she stirred, I told myself not to touch the bruises on her arm, though my fingers itched to smooth them away. I wanted to be nothing but a mother, yet 30 years in uniform made it impossible to ignore the details that screamed at me. The towel I'd pressed against her mouth was still on the counter, stiff with blood. The timestamp on the call log read 16 a.m. The ER discharge papers lay folded with my signature on the bottom line. They weren't just reminders of what happened. They were evidence. At 8 o'clock, a knock rattled the kitchen window. It was Dottie Alvarez from next door, her cardigan buttoned crooked, hair twisted up in pins. She carried a casserole dish and her phone clutched in both hands. "Maeve, I think my doorbell camera caught her coming over last night." She set the food down before I could answer. I pulled her into the hallway so Iris wouldn't hear. On her screen, under the yellow wash of the porch light, Iris stumbled against my railing. You could see the panic in the way she looked over her shoulder before pounding on the door. The clip ended with me pulling her inside. "Forward that to me," I said, keeping my voice calm though my chest surged. I plugged a flash drive into my laptop, guided Dottie through the export, then wrote the time, date, and file size on a notepad. Chain of custody isn't glamorous. It's handwriting and signatures, receipts taped to paper, but it's the line that separates justice from rumor. I signed my name at the bottom and slid the drive into an envelope. Iris woke a few hours later, blinking against the sunlight. She asked for tea, then whispered, "Do people know?" I didn't answer right away. In a town like ours, news travels faster than the river in spring flood. I sat on the edge of her bed. "What matters is that we have proof. He can't twist this into gossip. Not this time." She pressed her lips together and nodded, though the shame in her eyes nearly broke me. By afternoon, we were at the county courthouse. I'd called ahead, not to my own unit, but to the domestic violence desk. A young officer I didn't know met us in the lobby, her tie slightly askew. That mattered, keeping the line clear between my badge and my daughter's case. While Iris filled out the petition for a temporary protection order, I handed over the ER papers and the flash drive. The clerk initialed each page, and the officer logged the evidence bag into the system. Still, I felt the weight of eyes on me. People in line at the clerk's office stared longer than courtesy allowed. Maybe they already knew whose son-in-law we were talking about. Caleb worked the counter at Riverline Pawn, a place half the town relied on when bills piled too high. Men like him built reputations on favors and intimidation. Everyone owed, or thought they did. That's why gossip favored him over Iris. He was the one with keys to the cash drawer, not the girl behind an office desk, back at home. I set another pot of coffee and tried to read the officer's report, but my attention snagged on a thin envelope tucked beneath our door. Inside, a single note in block letters. "Shut up or you lose her." I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Part of me wanted to tear it into pieces. Another part wanted to bag it, photograph it, label it, march it straight to evidence intake. Instead, I slipped it into a plastic sleeve and scrawled the time on the edge. My hands shook harder than they had on any call I'd ever taken. When I returned to Iris's room, she was sitting upright, tea forgotten, eyes on me. "He won't stop, will he?" I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched. "He'll stop when the court tells him to, and if that doesn't work, he'll stop when a jury does." She leaned against me, and for the first time since that night, she let herself cry. I held her and watched the late sun angle through the blinds, stripes of light cutting across the floor like bars. Evidence, I thought, could trap or it could free. The choice of which one depended on how relentless I was willing to be. And I knew then, I hadn't even begun. By the second week, the weight of whispers grew louder than the sound of my own boots on the station floor. Willowbend was small enough that news hopped fences like squirrels. At the grocery store, 2 women paused in the baking aisle when I walked past with Iris's prescriptions. One leaned close to the other, muttering, "She's dragging his name through the mud." They didn't say it to my face, but they didn't need to. I'd worn this uniform long enough to know when a verdict had already been reached in the court of public opinion. That afternoon, I drove to Riverline Pawn. The place reeked of motor oil and stale cigarettes, the glass cases cluttered with guitars and gold chains. Caleb stood behind the counter, jaw set like a man who thought smirking made him taller. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. "Maeve," he said, as if we were old friends meeting over coffee. "You got my wife playing victim now?" I placed an envelope on the counter between us. Inside were copies of the ER records, photographs of Iris's bruises, and a still from Dottie's camera showing her stumbling toward my door. I didn't raise my voice. "These are facts, not stories. You'll have your chance to answer in court." He tapped the stack with one finger, slow and mocking. "Courts cost money. Stories cost nothing. Guess which one folks around here believe first?" I met his eyes until the grin faltered. "You've been warned," I said. Then I turned and walked out, the door chime jangling behind me like a nervous laugh. That night, Iris tried to eat dinner but barely touched her fork. She stared at her plate and said, "Everyone at the office looked at me like I'm contagious." I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "They only see what he's feeding them. We'll show them the truth." But when she went to bed, I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at that threatening note sealed in plastic. Words carry weight, but so does silence, and in a town like ours, silence could kill. The following morning, Graham Pike, our attorney, spread files across his office desk. He was meticulous, a man who treated each document like a chess piece. "We've got the medical evidence, the photos, the video," he said, "but we need more. The forged deed is our strongest leverage. If we can prove he tried to steal her property, that's fraud layered over assault. A jury won't overlook that. I frowned. The deed's already filed? Graham nodded. Quit claim. Signed with her name. Notarized by someone whose commission expired last year. Sloppy, but still dangerous if left unchallenged. We'll file an affidavit of forgery and get a lis pendens to freeze any transfer. When I brought the news home, Iris buried her face in her hands. He wanted the cabin. That's all this was about. It's never just about one thing, I told her. Power doesn't stop at your body. It reaches for your name, your land, your voice. He wanted all of it. That evening, another envelope slid under our door. This time it was thicker, stuffed with photocopied gossip pages. Anonymous printouts accusing me of using my badge to bully my son-in-law. My stomach churned. He wasn't just attacking Iris now. He was undermining me, stripping away the credibility I'd spent a career building. I walked to Iris's room, showed her the envelope. She looked at me, voice trembling but firm. Does this mean we stop? No, I said. It means we push harder. She swallowed, then nodded. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time, I saw steel under the bruises. That night, as I lay awake listening to the house settle, I knew the fight had shifted. It wasn't just bruises and whispers anymore. It was property, reputation, survival. And somewhere between the lines of those threats, I could almost hear Caleb laughing, convinced the town belonged to him. He was wrong, and soon he would learn just how wrong. The photographs arrived 3 days later. Tucked in a manila folder, Graham slid across his desk. I opened it slowly, careful not to smear the glossy finish. There they were, Caleb and the woman from the beacon, arms entwined as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. A neon clock above the bar read 11:47 p. Mom. Another shot showed them stepping into a motel room, the door number bright in the flash. Proof of infidelity wasn't the same as proof of assault, but it painted the picture of motive, of betrayal, of a man already halfway out the door while still wearing a wedding ring. I drove to the beacon that night, not in uniform, just jeans and a heavy coat. The jukebox hummed low, and the smell of beer clung to the floorboards. She was there, Sable Cruz, leaning against the bar with a cigarette dangling between her fingers. Younger than Iris, prettier in that fragile way that doesn't last. When she spotted me, her eyes narrowed. "You here to scare me?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I'm here to tell you what he's done." I laid the folder on the bar, slid one photo halfway out. Not of her, but of Iris's bruised face under the ER lights. This is what happens when the charm wears off. Her hand trembled around the cigarette. She looked away, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. He said she was hysterical, said she threw herself at the door. "That's the story he's selling," I replied. "But he didn't tell you about the deed, did he? The cabin by the lake? He filed paperwork to move it into your name. Used my daughter's signature. Forged and notarized by someone out of commission. That makes you part of a crime, whether you knew it or not." Her eyes snapped back to mine, sharp with fear. "He said it was already his. Said it was just paperwork catching up." I pulled another document from my bag, the affidavit of forgery Graham had filed that morning. "This says otherwise. And when the court asks you where you stood, you'll have to choose, with him or with the truth." Sable stubbed out her cigarette, jaw tight. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "He promised me security. Said once it was in my name, I'd be safe." "Safe?" My voice rose before I caught it. Safe from what? He hits the woman he vowed to protect. He lies to the one he lures next. You think you're different? Look at this photo again and tell me you'll be safe. She didn't touch the picture, but she didn't push it away either. Her shoulders sagged. If I talk, he'll come after me. And he already has you in his sights, I said. Talking is the only way out. When I left the beacon, the night air stung colder than usual. Behind me, Sable stood frozen at the bar, Iris's face still staring up at her from the counter. I didn't know yet if she'd testify, but for the first time, doubt had carved a crack in Caleb's armor. Driving home, I felt both exhaustion and a strange flicker of hope. If Sable found the courage to step forward, Caleb's lies would collapse under their own weight. And if she didn't, then at least she would never again believe she was safe in his shadow. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, the kind of place where every footstep echoes long after you've moved on. Iris sat beside me in the waiting area, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked pale as bone. I could feel the tremor in her leg under the bench, the anxious rhythm of someone bracing for a storm. Graham leaned over with a calmness I envied. We'll present the evidence one by one, he whispered. Stay steady. Let the proof do the talking. When the bailiff called our case, we walked into the courtroom as though stepping onto a stage. Caleb was already seated with his attorney. His tie crooked but his smile smooth, the kind that played well in small towns. He didn't glance at Iris. He looked straight at me, lips curling into something between mockery and challenge. The judge entered. Gavel, striking once. Graham rose first. Your Honor, we present Exhibits A through E. He moved like a conductor guiding an orchestra, each piece building on the last. Exhibit A was the ER record, projected on the screen. Contusions to the cheekbone, laceration of the lip, bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. My daughter's pain laid out in sterile print. Iris's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. Exhibit B, the photographs I'd taken in the kitchen, time-stamped, her face swollen, the towel stiff with dried blood. A hush fell over the room. Even the clerk's pen paused. Exhibit C, the video from Dottie's doorbell camera. The jury, though this was technically a bench hearing, not a trial, leaned forward as Iris appeared on screen, stumbling in the glow of the porch light, glancing over her shoulder in terror before pounding on my door. The clip ended with me pulling her inside. I heard someone in the gallery murmur, "My God." Exhibit D, the forged deed, enlarged on poster board. Graham pointed out the expired notary commission, the mismatched strokes of Iris's supposed signature. A blatant attempt, he said, to strip a young woman of her inheritance and transfer it to another woman's name. He let the words hang there, heavy and deliberate. Finally, Exhibit E, the photographs from the private investigator, Caleb with Sable at the beacon, later entering the motel together. The neon clock glared 11:47 p.m. The motel door number visible, proof not of violence, but of deceit, motive, and betrayal. The judge turned toward Caleb's attorney. Do you wish to cross-examine? The lawyer adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and muttered, No questions at this time. His client, however, couldn't stay silent. Caleb slammed his palm on the table. She's lying. They're all lying. His voice cracked across the room. That cabin was mine. She knew it. The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Morton, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Caleb sank back, but his face was flushed, his composure slipping. For the first time, the mask cracked. Then the bailiff escorted Sable to the stand. Her heels clicked against the floor like a countdown. She sat, raised her hand, and swore the oath. For a moment she looked small, almost fragile. Caleb's eyes bored into her, daring her to speak. She began quietly. He told me the cabin was his. He said if I stayed loyal, he'd put it in my name. But then I saw... Her voice faltered, but she steadied herself, locking eyes with me. I saw the photos of Iris, the bruises, and I knew I couldn't keep quiet. He asked me to sign papers, to play along. I didn't understand until now that it was fraud. I'm here because I won't let him use me the way he used her. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that vibrates with truth. Caleb lunged half out of his seat, face twisted with rage, but the bailiff's hand on his shoulder forced him back down. Iris squeezed my hand so tight it hurt, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me she was still beside me, still breathing, still fighting. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. The petition for a long-term protective order is granted. The deed in question is deemed invalid, pending criminal investigation into forgery and fraud. Assets are frozen until further notice. This matter is referred to the district attorney for prosecution. The gavel struck 3 sharp knocks. Just like that. The storm had broken. Iris exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for weeks. Tears slid down her cheeks, but her grip on my hand remained steady. I felt my own chest loosen for the first time since that night on the porch. Justice wasn't finished yet, but it had finally found its footing. Caleb's smile was gone, replaced by the stunned face of a man realizing the world no longer bent to him. And in that courtroom, under those high ceilings and harsh lights, I felt a flicker of peace I hadn't known in months. The ride home from court felt different. The same streets, the same stoplights, the same gray Ohio sky, but for the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel poisonous. Iris leaned her head against the window, watching the familiar houses roll past, her reflection ghosted by sunlight. She hadn't spoken since we left the courthouse. Finally, at a red light, she whispered, "It's really over, isn't it?" I kept my eyes on the road. "It's not over," I said. "But it's enough. The law is on our side now. He can't just walk into your life unchecked anymore." When we pulled into the driveway, Dottie Alvarez was waiting on the porch with her casserole dish, washed and wrapped in foil. She gave Iris a hug, long and fierce. For weeks we had felt the weight of the town's gossip, but now the tide was shifting. People who had whispered in aisles were starting to see with their own eyes. Evidence had a way of cutting through rumor like a blade. That night, Iris sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup she actually finished. She laughed, quiet, tentative, but it was laughter all the same. When I spilled a splash of broth down my sleeve, I hadn't realized until that moment how much I missed the sound of her laugh. Healing, I knew, would not come all at once. It would come in small, ordinary moments like this. A week later, she returned to her job at the accounting office. I walked her to the door that morning, the sun slanting across the lawn, and I told her she was stronger than she realized. She smiled, shoulders straight, carrying her bag like a shield. Watching her go was harder than I expected, but also sweeter, because she wasn't walking alone into a storm anymore. As for me, I went back to my own shift at the precinct. Colleagues nodded at me with the kind of respect that doesn't need words. The note of threat we'd received had been logged, dusted, and filed. Another piece of evidence in the growing case. Caleb was under investigation for assault and fraud. And though trials take time, the system had finally turned its gaze on him. Late one evening, I sat on the porch with the lamp casting a circle of gold on the steps. The air was cool, the kind that smelled of leaves and earth. I thought about the night Iris had stumbled into my arms, the blood, the fear, the desperate pounding on the door. That memory would never leave me, but it no longer owned me. I looked at the glow spilling across the porch and said aloud, though no one was there to hear, silence feeds the monster, speaking breaks its hold. Tonight, this house is ours again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day. And for the first time since that terrible night, I believed it.